very warm welcome, Karl. Thank you for making the time to join us today. It's fantastic that you've given us your time and support to help us understand how to get race networks right. So thank you. Governance, which you're all about, and it makes you and other people tingly. It's often abandoned around term. So why is governance important to running an effective race network?
In fact, Javed, and thank you for allowing me to address everybody here today. Yes, I am the guy who gets tingly about governance. So let me define what it is first of all and why it's important to a network. The classic definition is from Sir Adrian Cadbury back in 1992 when he chaired the Cadbury Report, and he said corporate governance is the system by which companies are directed and controlled. And that's really important because we're going to talk about systems. You see, corporate governance is making sure we get the systems right and not going down to the operations and detail, because that's where we can get change at a systemic level. And we hear about that all of the time when we talk about anti-racism. So corporate governance is at the core of it, Javed. Secondly, it talks about directing and controlling because we're aiming for leadership. But my definition of corporate governance, to complement Sir Adrian's, it's the glue that pulls together performance and purpose, because we want to get the purpose right. It's the glue that makes sure the aspirations that we've got have got some accountability. It's the glue that makes sure that we've got objectives that lead to outcomes. See, corporate governance isn't just about compliance. It really is about how we break down those barriers and how we get that performance, accountability, and outcomes.
Brilliant, thank you. And in governance, what part do the terms of reference play?
The terms of reference enable us to be effective. So how do we be effective? We've got to have a clear purpose, so we understand what the organisation, what the committee is doing. We've got to have clear objectives and duties. We even need to know who the membership of the committee needs to be so that we can get the right people there and what authority they've got. So all of that aids to making sure we're effective, but then we've got to be efficient in our operation. So that's why I expect us to understand how are decisions made, what is the quorum of which is the number of people allowed to vote to make decisions, the schedule of meetings and the frequency of meetings. So if we're meeting once a year or twice a year, is that as efficient as someone meeting every week? And does every week work, for example? And then what are the secretarial administrative functions to make sure it operates effectively? And you may think this is a small point, but getting people to understand the administration and reviewing at the end of a period how well the committee is working. And then finally, and very importantly, is the accountability. I think we're really got to make sure that we have minutes, we see what matters are arising out of those minutes so we can track what we decided and make sure we understand who we report to and what happens with that reporting. So does it go straight to the board? Does it go to one of the other statutory committees like an audit committee? And who do we have access to and what resources do we have to carry out our role? So just there, in just a couple of minutes, I've talked about lots of things that the terms of reference really have to make sure we've talked about.
Brilliant, thank you. For over 12 months now, we've been talking to a lot of organisations and race networks. And interesting, one thing that came up, especially, after the George Floyd murder and what's happened to COVID and everything, the race networks were fantastic support communities, and really supportive on that. But a lot of people feel that race networks don't always work, or they don't have teeth to make an impact. Can you sort of explain where maybe actually, if they had the right terms of reference, they would be more impactful versus, the ones that were actually struggling?
Yeah, that's a really great analogy to talk about terms of reference, Javed, because it is my opinion that the better the terms of reference, the more we can challenge why some of these resource groups don't work, ERGs. And quite straightforward is making sure, for example, that we've got the right objectives. There's not too many, there's not too little, and the objectives that are going to move the dial. And a number of things that I just spoke about when I was talking about what should be in the terms of reference, I've found when I've looked at terms of reference for some of these groups, some of them have been so underwhelming. So you start to read it and think, okay, let me start seeing what they do. And all of a sudden it stops, literally less than a page of writing. Others, you're thinking, why is all of this information in here? And there's an almost overload of information. And also it overlaps with other areas of the business. And then there's no accountability or no reporting framework. And then you think, is there any wonder that this group isn't going to work? Because the actual thinking about how it's pulled together hasn't been in line with other groups. I've reviewed lots and lots of different types of terms of reference in governance, and particularly in this space. In one organization, I can remember looking through the disability network group, the gender network group, and the equality kind of network group. 3 different terms of reference from the same organization. And unfortunately, the equality one was the poor cousin of the other 2. It probably came later on in the journey, but also what we can do is make sure that we learn from best practice from all of them, so they all are robust, sound, and able to deliver what we want them to deliver.